In my last video, I talked about why the Oakland A's were not going to move to Las Vegas, and lo and behold, what do you know? The team has already backed out of a binding agreement to purchase land in the city. Instead, the A's want to build another new stadium at the location where the Tropicana Hotel currently sits. Ignoring the fact this plot is basically connected to Harry Reid International Airport and the FAA is going to be none too happy about a stadium being built there for just 1 second, it's impossible to ignore the fact the A's are still asking for public money, which was the biggest complaint about the first Las Vegas stadium site. But wait, what if I told you this time around, John Fisher and his cronies were only asking for $395 million as opposed to the $500 million they needed for the Red Rock site? I'm sure that generous offer is going to be too good to pass up. Or maybe not. How this deal is any better than the not so binding agreement the A's just signed a few weeks ago is a mystery to most. What is now evident, though, is that John Fisher and A's leadership, well, they're the second coming of the Maloof Brothers. I have got my Oakland A's souvenir helmet that came full of, well, pretty mediocre nachos when I purchased it back in the day, and I also have my Oakland Coliseum Oakland A's souvenir drink cup that was full of probably some of the most watered down soda you'll ever drink in your life, but I want you to join me as I take you on a journey of some, well, pretty recent Northern California sports ownership history. John Fisher is 100% following the Maloof Brothers' failed relocation playbook. Those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. Of course, arrogant, cheapskate sports owners who were born with a silver spoon in their mouth, well, they don't really necessarily comprehend that reality. Anyway, the Maloof Brothers' failed relocation playbook, it goes something like this. Step 1, you have to make half-hearted attempts to build a stadium in your home city. The Maloof Brothers, well, we all in Sacramento knew that they had zero desire to spend their own money on a new arena for the Sacramento Kings. They literally backed out of a plan they agreed to days after the Sacramento City Council approved it in 2012. By the way, that wasn't even the first time the Maloof Brothers had tried that trick in Sacramento. They loved to talk about how they wanted a new stadium and how committed they were to the city, but when it came time to put up or shut up, they didn't really make a peep. John Fisher did essentially the same thing with the Howard Terminal Stadium project. Progress was being made, albeit probably slower than most people would have hoped for, but there was progress being made nonetheless. Then someone told him, incorrectly as it turns out, that hey, public funds might be available in Las Vegas, and he shut down any talk with Oakland. Step 2 of the Maloof's failed relocation playbook, well, that is to ruin the on-field, or in the case of the Kings, on-court product. During the late 2000s and early 2010s, the Maloof Brothers basically gutted the Sacramento Kings franchise, ensuring they had no hope of being good ever. They were constantly getting fleeced in trades. They were never signing anyone of note. This was one of the worst times in basketball for a franchise that has a ton of terrible times. They purposely made the team as bad as possible. A little over a decade later, and John Fisher has done the exact same thing with the Oakland Athletics. The play here is so blatantly obvious that even dumbass Tucker Carlson couldn't concoct a conspiracy theory to cover for it. Fisher has blamed the stadium for his inability to field a quality team, when in reality, this was his own doing. Fisher has simply swapped out the likes of Francisco Garcia and Jason Thompson and replaced them with baseball players like Tony Kemp and Shintaro Fujinami. Step 3 of this failed relocation playbook is to start angling for some poorly thought out moves elsewhere. In 2011, the Maloof Brothers decided that they were going to take the Sacramento Kings to Anaheim and play in the Honda Center, despite the fact this move made absolutely no sense. Unbelievably, they thought it was a good idea to become the third team in Southern California, a market that barely accepts the second team. But on top of that, they wanted to play in a hockey venue that was built only 5 years after Arco Arena was completed. RIP Arco Arena, we're going to miss you. Once people in Sacramento caught on to what was happening and critical thinking was applied to the Anaheim move, well, it didn't go anywhere. The city eventually stepped up with some money to keep the team in town, and David Stern put the kibosh on that relocation attempt. Similarly, John Fisher and the A's have just decided that they were going to move to Las Vegas with no real plan in place. At least not a plan that has any semblance of logic behind it. The team already pulled out of one binding agreement to acquire land for a stadium so it could pursue another plan that has similarly no substance and no depth to it. Where are your freaking renders, dude? The fourth and final step to the Maloof's failed relocation playbook is revenge. Eventually, the Maloof brothers, after being thwarted on numerous attempts, became so obsessed with sticking it to the city of Sacramento that that's all they focused on. Their goal was no longer to move the team, it was to screw the city of Sacramento out of a team. It is why they floated that absurd Virginia Beach move, and it is why they sought out Chris Hansen, who wanted to buy the team and move it to Seattle. Despite moving the goalposts on numerous occasions during the potential sale to both Sacramento and Seattle, everyone saw through these shenanigans. Hell, David Stern probably would have let Chris Hansen buy the team and move it to Seattle had the Maloof brothers not been clearly acting out of spite here. For that, you can see Bennett, Clay. John Fisher hasn't quite got to this step in the playbook, but he's getting pretty close. There's no way Las Vegas is floating this dude any public money to build him a stadium. And given the fact Fisher and Dave Kaval and the rest of the A's leadership can't even get anything related to a plan together, it's hard to see how this site at the Tropicana ends any differently than the first site they announced just a few weeks previously. Besides, who would want to partner with these morons? In the past few weeks alone, they have managed to screw Oakland completely and backed out of a binding agreement after making a huge song and dance about how this was going to be great and how they were committed to this plan. They are comically untrustworthy. If there is one thing I am looking forward to in all of this mess, it is Tim Curry eventually playing Dave Kaval in the movie adaptation of this saga. That will be epic. While not related to the playbook, there is one last thing worth mentioning about John Fisher and the Maloof brothers. They are all silver spoon failures. It's important to note that the wealth of both parties came from their families. Fisher's daddy founded the Gap, and he had the luxury of failing at property development before inheriting his vast wealth from Pops. On the other hand, the Maloofs sort of built on a liquor distribution empire their father had created. They would eventually buy a casino and sell that in the year 2000 at a hefty profit, although that casino was a locals-only dump in northern Las Vegas. They would even go on to use the proceeds from that sale to launch the Palms. Probably not the best investment they could have ever made, and by the time the late 2000s and early 2010s rolled around, the Maloofs had squandered just about all of their money. But hey, they got to be in a David Banner video with Barry Bonds, so I mean, there's that. Let's be perfectly clear though, John Fisher, the Maloof brothers, they don't ever own sports teams had it not been for the fact that they inherited wealth from their families. While that is annoying, that's not the most annoying part of this story. That has to be Rob Manfred just sort of letting this shit show play out as is. Do something, dude! At least David Stern managed the King situation and gave all parties a fair shake. That in and of itself is fairly remarkable given how many dodgy and shady things the NBA commissioner did over the years. Seriously, all Manfred has to do is step in and say something. Anything, doesn't matter. And if not Manfred, what about the owners? In 1992, the National League owners narrowly rejected attempts by the San Francisco Giants to move to Tampa Bay, a decision that has aged like fine wine. Then Giants owner Bob Lowry, he was forced to sell the team to a local owner, and guess what? They got a new stadium built a few years later. That is extremely important to note here. As we saw with the Maloof Brothers, as we saw with Lowry, when owners are forced to sell to local interests, local companies, local individuals who have a vested interest in the city, they tend to get stadium deals done. That's because when you have an owner that wants to be in the city, they tend to find a way to make it work. Ultimately, good riddance to you, John Fisher, and good riddance to the Maloof Brothers for all of the scorn, all of the hurt, and all of the absolutely terrible basketball they made Sacramentans sit through during the late 2000s and early 2010s. That does it for me. This is The Touchback. I'm Cheyenne Hollis, and as always, hashtag take it out to the 25.